Aloha mai kako, mahalo for joining us this evening. The organization coordinating the stream, HULI PAC, was birthed from a shared drive to work our system by seeking āina-based, equity-focused leadership for our Hawai'i Island community. Now more than ever, we need leaders who are willing to circle back to our roots and instill real change in the community from Kona to Ka'u, from Hilo to Hawi. The time is now to HULI the system. Conducting our interviews tonight are Michaela Ikeuchi and myself, and I'd like to welcome Councilmember Rebecca Villegas. Rebecca, why don't you take a couple minutes to introduce yourself?
Sure. Aloha, my name is Rebecca Villegas. I have had the opportunity to be born and raised here on the Big Island. I am a big white girl, I like to say, but I'm actually fifth generation. My mom's a Kona grad. I'm a Kona grad. I grew up as an advocate here on the west side predominantly for land use issues, some cultural issues, access to surfing and gathering rights related to Kohana Iki and the Pash decision. I also worked for the Kona Brewing Company for 14 years, where I got to manage their marketing and help kind of create the brand pillars for Kona Brewing, which then I got to find different projects and organizations and groups that were in alignment with those pillars and support them through Liquid Aloha, which was really, really fun. My career with Kona Brewing Company, I decided to move on approximately 6 years ago. I took a couple of years and started my own events company. I got to work with different community-minded nonprofit organizations, some for-profit. And at that time, my predecessor, Drew Kanuha, decided to run for the open seat as our senator, which time I was approached by some of my long-term mentors, Miley David and Karen Eoff, and asked if I would consider running for office. My first response was, and then it was, well, let me take it to the people that I know and trust and the constituents of this district and see if they would be interested in my serving in this position, representing them. Thankfully, I got almost all positive responses and kind of stepped out on the journey of running for office. I'm currently halfway through my second term and running this year for the honor and privilege and responsibility of serving a third term. You can serve 4 terms and each term is 2 years. So that's kind of takes me up to now. It's been an adventure and a challenge, serving during a global pandemic, but really tried to pivot and learn as much as possible and support our community through these challenging times.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that background with us. Our first question is based on your experience in the county council so far. We're wondering, do you think it's effective? If yes, why? And if not, what would you change about the general governing body or how it works?
And I'm sorry, just to clarify, the county council itself?
Yes.
Yes. It's interesting. Somebody was trying to pitch a program for Kona and they kept calling it a city. And I had to stop them and say, actually, we're more of a village. And just so you have a frame of reference, the whole population of our island is actually smaller than a lot of cities at 220,000 people that live on this island. So, we're broken into 9 different districts to represent the communities in those areas, not based on particularly size of geography, but on the number of people. Having 9 members there to vote, you have the challenges and the opportunities of a majority. I don't think it's any secret that our island has struggled for decades with separation between East and West, and the seat of power has always resided on the East side. And as Hawaii has grown as a county and the tourism industry has grown, the West side has been predominantly the source of the tax revenue for county government. So inherently, you are going to have issues when you have a certain part of the island bringing in the resources and another side that isn't as connected to, and it's much easier to approve things that aren't happening really in your backyard. So I don't know of another system necessarily. I know it's been bounced around for years, splitting the county, going to an east and a west. But, I turn to some of my my predecessors and mentors, and in looking to the wisdom of maintaining a united island and what that means for us. I think that there is currently more wisdom in that, if that's any part of the question. A lot of people don't understand what a county council person does, that we're the legislative branch. And so we mitigate a lot of questions, concerns, complaints, frustrations with issues that are more directly related to the administration and the mayor's office, and then his appointed directors of those offices. So as always in the human condition, there are loads of opportunities for us to improve. There have been numerous ways of improvement, and we have navigated this pandemic, I think, really well with the opportunities to join via Zoom. We have chambers in Kona and we have chambers in Hilo, and we take turns going back and forth. So, and now we will be continuing to allow for Zoom testimony from different constituents, which is very helpful for those that find it challenging to get to chambers, but you can now return in person to testify in chambers. And we had some testifiers last week in person, and it meant a lot. Auntie Pua Kanahele was there, and her words and just having her being present was really impactful for me, and supported my continued determination to serve in this role and this job, if I can be in any way supportive of the vision and the programs she's working on.
Thank you. Taylor, you have a question for Rebecca?
Yes, that was wonderful. Thank you. My first question for you is, what do you value most, and how would you apply those values to help guide Hawai'i Island's future?
It's become exceedingly clear to me, growing up here, one of the big pushes was you got to go away to go to school. Hawaii's only got what Hawaii's got. You got to go away. And I went to Manoa. I went to Oahu to go to school for a few years. Then I went up to Colorado on an exchange program. Thankfully, I could pay UH tuition because that's all I could afford. Still student loans, thank you. And then I moved to San Francisco after college. And my mom said, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "Why am I going there specifically?" I said, "Mom, I want to explore the demographics of my happiness. Am I Hawaii because it's what I had access to? Or do I hold the values and the vision and the connection to sense of place and kuleana because that's who I am?" And after 2 years of being in San Francisco, I was working with inner city kids doing environmental education projects and waiting tables at a brewery, because working with kids, as we all know, does not pay what it should. But it became that much more clear to me when I came home that this is my home. This is my place of purpose and contribution. In San Francisco, 2 terms really came out to me. Mind you, this was late 90s, and it was disposability and accountability and kuleana. Like anything could just be thrown away in a city, right? And there is still an away. That away is farther for us here on an island. So our connection, the relationships, the impacts, the understanding of one another. And this was in the 90s, and we didn't have the unhoused situation in Kona that we have now. But I remember thinking that when I was there, like I knew the young man who walks on the road holding his head, who has mental health issues. We knew the man that, drove the moped with the long dreadlocks and was also unhoused. And just how having that point of connection allows for easier kuleana and understanding of what role and place versus entitlements or what you're owed or your rights. It's more, where can I participate? I'm a mom. I was a single mom for a while, but I've been happily married now for 16 years. And I'm now also a tutu. I find sense of purpose in my ohana and in how I can give back and set an example for them. And we live in a multi-generational house, which used to be like, no, you got to go get your own. That's not really that possible anymore. So my values come to being rooted and grounded and accountable to this community, within this community.
That's wonderful.
Thank
so
I
you.
saw the clock.
That's great. Let's see the next.
We're gonna continue on with housing because we know that's a big hot topic. And so what is your answer to insufficient affordable housing on Hawaii Island, or what paradigm shifting opportunities do we have?
I wish I had the answer. It's something that doesn't come with a job, unfortunately, is a magic wand. I have worked side by side and hand in hand with different groups to build tiny houses at Maka'eo during the COVID pandemic. I've done some work with Habitat for Humanity. I love the model that they're utilizing. You know, I did go rounds with the planning department on updating of the planning code and how that relates to factory built housing. I think there's real opportunity for us to cut down some of the costs by utilizing factory built housing, but we want to make sure it is imperative that health and safety also be protected, because the housing is, you know, our local people, our local people need to be housed, but the health and safety of those structures can't be compromised. We have to ensure, because as we all know, I don't have a whole lot of money for home fixes. Thankfully, I have a very handy husband, so we need to make sure that those capabilities are there. I also just had a meeting last week with some folks who are doing some kind of some research with 3D printing of homes, cement 3D printing. So kind of transitioning, how do we skip, you know, we know the problem we're in, we're not the only ones in this problem. There's a housing crisis around the country. However, I will say, I don't personally believe it's because there's a lack of structures. I think it's because of a gross displacement of resources, and some people have so much while others have nothing. And so, but how do we navigate and solve that in a democratic and, you know, capital society, you know, capitalist society? So I don't have the answers, but I know we need to continue to pursue them and explore them. First off, it's recognizing it. I mean, it's really, we tried really hard to get even more workforce housing out of the development that was just approved yesterday of 1,100 more timeshare units in Waikoloa. And a lot of the people that work there commute across the island. So I am hopeful that as the challenges become actually more extreme, the solutions will become that much clearer. I was told 2 weeks ago that 35,000 people moved away from the island during the pandemic. And I know that more than that moved here, and most of them buying homes for cash above asking value. The demographic is a different type of person who's working from home on a computer. So then we're also left with workforce shortages. So, but the paradigm of a 20% housing credits for a developer, I have a really hard time stomaching that anymore, because that's been what it's been for decades. And that's why we're in this position, because 80% of those homes that are built are not built for people who live here. Ideally, we could be buying them, but it's not feasible with prices over $1 million, and our wages have not gone up, and gas prices are $6. And yeah.
Thank you. Some interesting solutions.
My next question revolves around Native Hawaiian rights. I was wondering, what do you see as the most pressing issue facing Native Hawaiians on Hawai'i Island, and what will you do about it?
Interesting. Another part of this job that I find really humbling, and for me has been a paradise shift in running for office for both of my prior terms, is questions like this that once again, I wish I don't have the particular answer for, and I humble myself to ever try and say, or to impose that on the Native Hawaiian community. Something that I have had the opportunity to just work with, and we passed, was the Hua Makahi. I'm gonna annihilate it. My apologies. I'm nervous. Hua Mahikina Declaration. Hua Mahikina. Am I getting it right, Michaela? No.
Sounds great.
Okay, we'll just keep going.
No, it sounds great.
It's on the integrity and stewardship and protection of hula. And I think 100 practitioners got together and created this standard of treatment for the practice that outlines abuse, ignorance, the protection and recognition and access and resourcing, validating what we all, well, some of us know the value of hula as a practice and its lineage and its sacredness. I also feel like for myself, working with the leaders who put together the Aina Aloha Economic Futures, for me, trying to ensure that the way that I lead and the way that I look at issues is in alignment with the value systems and the rubric they created here. So for me, and continuing to look to my kumu and my mentors to ask for their guidance and their insight when different issues come up. Because another interesting part of this job is you can go in thinking what you're going to work on and what you're going to fix, and all these other things happen and you end up needing to work on those. So I mean, I got a call from a kumu the other day saying, hey, what's the old Sheraton, it's now the Outrigger, got accidentally, they don't have access to the trolley because the transition was at that time for the hotel ownership and when the routing was created. So can you call and help us reroute that? So for me, that's my responsibility and kuleana. I want to make sure that I'm always approachable, but that the value systems that I see presented, that I am accountable to those, no matter what the issue is, that I utilize those value systems. Values are so important because they dictate our behaviors, right? They, no matter what the issue is, how we prioritize, and doesn't make it easy always, but sure, it does make it simpler. Like, I'm sorry, I can't support that because it doesn't stand up to this.
That's lovely. That's lovely. Thank you so much. Alexia?
Thank you. Yeah, we're going to transition into land use and development. So the next question is, do you think that a form of agricultural activity needs to be mandatory and enforced for each household in subdivisions with ag zoning?
Yes, ideally, that would be amazing. One thing that they did do, and a lot of people are not super excited about, but they did finally take all the homes that are on pieces of property that are under 1 acre, and they basically said, this isn't real commercial agricultural land. And so they adjusted their property taxes, which has caused some, some challenges. And unfortunately, there were some people negatively impacted, but it's become a loophole for building McMansions on land that should otherwise be producing something for people to eat. And my parents have a 5-acre farm. They have sheep, they have bees, they have dogs, they have an orchard, they have all these different things going on there. And we, I think people look at the Big Island and go, there's so much land, wow, but we don't have a lot of soil. So working with the Kona Soil and Water District, in ways to make sure that the agricultural land that we have becomes that much more productive by keeping our soils healthy, I think is imperative. But also closing the loophole. The challenge in county government is we don't have really the funding for monitoring everything. It's one of the challenges. It's just on a reporting basis. And so, I have a property in my district right now that's operating illegal commercial activities. Nothing's permitted. There's a flood mitigation project that's been under construction for over 15 years that's now causing severe environmental damage and brown water occurrences. So only through the good and hard work of our inspectors who have been diligent, who are looking to people in positions of leadership to make that hard decision and hold people accountable and say, no, this is ag land, and industrial activities on ag land are not okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that transition is really important when we think about food security as well.
Mm-hmm.
My next question is revolves around the economy. I was
Mm-hmm.
wondering, since we kind of know that tourism will continue on our shores regardless, how can we ensure that the tourism industry is of service to our working families rather than the other way around?
So during the pandemic, when we were all in lockdown, I found myself, I was sewing masks, trying to figure out what to do in this job where I could still be of service, but not be setting a bad example by being out and about. So, I served in some of the testing facilities and whatnot, but I came across a course at UC Berkeley, their extension on circular economy. And I took the course, and, no no group in the world knows more about circular economy than an island nation and an island community. And I did watch the previous interviews with some of my counterparts on the council, and acknowledging the abundance that Hawaiians lived with on this island with many more people. So I look to circular economy to become some of those solutions in requiring more responsibility and accountability from our hotels, from those that operate tourist, I don't want to say attractions, but boating companies or dive companies or hiking and those kinds of experientials. It's elevating the standard of what's expected. And there's a great boat that's been operating for decades that has transitioned to all mineral-based sunscreens. So every person that goes on the boat can only use that. They've gone to vegan food to ensure that they're eliminating their footprints. So I think that as we, a lot of it, some of the responsibility falls to those who operate businesses that benefit off the tourist economy. I know it just died in the state legislature, but it's something I did my final report for the circular economy course, was transitioning to bulk dispensers for toiletries and hotels. And the data and the numbers that I pulled on how much ends up in our landfill. There's a plethora. There's also impact fees. There are a number of different things. Defunding or transitioning the funding from the Hawaii Tourism Authority. We don't need to market our islands anymore. We need to manage. We do have, there's a limit to these resources, and they can be overrun and inundated. And we've already seen, I think we're seeing that, and the pause during the pandemic gave our communities an opportunity to remember what it was like to have a home that wasn't just constantly overrun. Our roads in Kona, traffic horrible, loco blocko, da. When tourism paused and thousands of rental cars weren't on the road, our roads were plenty for those that live here. So we have to catch up and change this paradigm of thought that we have to have visitors. We need infrastructure. We need wastewater treatment facilities. We need roads. We need houses. We need workforce in areas where these businesses operate. So people aren't spending 4 hours on the bus. It just really, so I continue to look to other municipalities that struggle with similar challenges, who have had an over-reliance on tourism, and just based on a value system. My vote yesterday was based on that. The developer has it's all within their legal terms, but to continue to add more when we just came out of a pandemic where everybody was saying, we've got to change this paradigm. We've got to do something different. I don't know what the exact solutions are, but we can't end up again like this. And so to me, it didn't seem pono nor commonsensical to approve another 1,100 timeshare units.
Thank you, Councilmember. Alexia?
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, shifting into food security and agriculture, but I guess in a similar vein, which local agricultural projects are you most proud of in your district, and how potentially can those models scale to meet local needs, both for food and potentially for diversified labor opportunities?
Sure. The predominant agricultural product I'd say that comes from my district is predominantly Kona coffee. Although Ulu, I'm so proud of the Ulu co-op and everything they did during the pandemic to provide food. This whole opportunity to get local food to our children through the resilience hubs and other mechanisms was really exciting. Food hubs, you know, Autumn Ness in Maui is a good friend of mine, and what they have done with the Maui Food Hub is fantastic. We have our farmers markets right now in the legislature. Well, some might argue that coffee is a very necessary drink and beverage to have. I don't know if we can sustain ourselves on it completely, right? However, it is imperative that our coffee farmers get the support they need in order to get top dollar. And we have been for decades depleting that opportunity for them by the labeling issues that exist, so that the major blenders, I've also been learning through researching this, that we introduced the coffee bearer board, because right now, according to legislation, they import green coffee beans from outside of Hawaii, in which the bearer board lives. So it's really important fundamentally that we recognize the value of our resources and that it's worth fighting for, transitioning from a scarcity model of, well, then if they say or they don't take, to like, no, we have one of the most precious resources in the world. We have some of the best coffee in the world. We have an opportunity. I grew up, you know, we had a half-acre farm up in Ahikawa Street, and we had papayas and mangoes and avocados, and it's a thought process and I think it's all very connected once again with your housing market and ag property, whether or not it's got a McMansion or it actually has, you know, and I'll segue a little bit into climate change and global warming. It's imperative that we're planting trees and we're covering the ground and we're creating healthy soils wherever we can. So I think there's really vast opportunity. I also think it's going to be very important that we transition lands on this island who, in my mind, unfortunately, were leased for growing eucalyptus trees. That I know the intention was to pulp them, which you can't pulp eucalyptus trees into the ocean. You know, those things have, thankfully, a lot of lawsuits have stopped that. But now the challenge is, what do you do with the eucalyptus trees? I'm not in support of what the opportunity is now, but what I do have vision for is all of that land returning to agricultural use, viable, authentic, locally consumed agricultural use. And the challenge is getting, you know, the properties now that aren't being utilized in a way that I think is as effective to feed our people.
Yeah, thank you for elaborating on that.
My next question, you kind of mentioned a little bit already about climate change mitigation. My question is related to that as well. So I was wondering, regarding sea level rise adaptation, seawall permits, counties have the discretion to regulate setbacks and permits for hardening shorelines. The movement around the state and in other coastal areas is to anticipate and regulate a managed shoreline retreat. What other preparations should we be making for sea level rise now?
Something near and dear to my heart. During my first term, I brought the opportunity, my second term, I brought the opportunity to then Harry Kim to join on to the climate litigation lawsuit that Maui and Oahu have joined onto. I have sent, and we brought forth a resolution in the council, which was passed. That administration didn't choose to pick up and join. However, I have met with our current mayor and have been speaking with Corp Council, and I continue to do my best to encourage him to make that decision, because you know, they've come out with some of the reporting that it's going to cost a minimum I believe it was $463 million just to move the infrastructure on our coastlines, which is predominantly, we have some more rugged areas that aren't as developed on the coastline, but areas like Kona and Hilo and down south and Pu'uko will still be are already being drastically impacted. The cost to move that infrastructure is close to $500 million, and that'll fall to taxpayers. So in my mind, it behooves us to join in this litigation. Also, we need to revamp our planning and building codes to impose much stricter setbacks because I would hate for there to be any liability on the county for continuing to allow building there. When it comes to hardening of shorelines, it makes me think of seawalls. And I personally feel that seawalls have done a lot more damage than good. They may protect the structure itself, but from an ecosystem standpoint and water flow, it's caused way more damage. And water doesn't stop. She will get where she needs to. Look at Waimea Valley on Kauai and how that's been so beautifully designed by the flow of water, and the Grand Canyon. And it's funny for me that humans, we kind of still think that, well, I'll just put this up and this will just hold it all back. No, we need to move where we build, and we need to transition and find our way further Mauka.
That's great. I love how you referred to water as the personification of water. I feel really upholds Hawaiian values as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your lovely answer. Alexia?
Yeah, going back to circular economy, one of the important aspects of the zero waste or the circular movement is rendering green waste into beneficial agricultural products such as compost and mulch, and making it easily accessible in distributed boutique facilities around the island. This also helps rebuild our soils for increased agricultural production. How have you been involved in these efforts to date, and what will you do moving forward to help expedite this process and access?
Sure. I've worked with Jeff Knowles at the Soil Water Conservation District, provided some funding for them to do education throughout our community about the need for healthy soils. We've also been in contact recently because there are some challenges now with picking up mulch at the Kalakahe wastewater treatment facility. I also, a few months ago, visited the mulch facility in Hilo, Hawaii Earth Works, I believe is what their facility is called. Gorgeous what they turn, this quality of the mulch that comes out of there, the scent, you can tell that it's alive. What I also learned was one of the challenges is we don't do that on this side because we don't have the water access. So you have people lining up once a month in Hilo to get this gold, right, for their farms and to enrich their soils. And in Kona, we can pick up dry mulch, which is still like gold. But it's my understanding that the county is currently, we weren't really allowed to gather too much specific information about it because there was a contract drawn up related to an industrial composter that was supposed to be built in Hilo that is not being built. But in that interim, there's also been a lot more conversations about decentralizing composting facilities, having smaller capacities around the island, which make a lot more sense. I mean, we're fortunate to live next to an empty lot, so our green waste kind of goes and dissolves there, but not everybody has that. However, if then we took it somewhere that then it was turned into, so trying to be creative on solutions for that. I also had the opportunity to work with Maona Farms and go down and see Evan Lamb and the cardboard shredder, and I was able to help fund some of their work at their farm. And since then I was also able to help La'iopua purchase a cardboard shredder. And helping Evan, do this cardboard shredding around the island changes the paradigm of people's thought pattern about what's possible with our waste. And it's not that hard to process, and it creates this incredible resource. I've used it to make trash fashion costumes. But once again, changing the concept of waste to resources right? And how do we make sure, once again, there's equitable distribution between the east and west side? I know that Jeff Knowles, they've just secured some incredible grant funding that green waste is going to be imperative to the success of. So I'm dedicated to continuing to work with him and Ramsey Mansour and the Department of Environmental Management for how we facilitate that and bring everybody together, because we have such opportunity.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned Evan. He's one of my favorite people to hype up because the work that he's doing is so grassroots and important. So that's great. Akila, over to you.
My next question has to do with social issues. I was wondering, which marginalized communities do you consider yourself an advocate for? And what policies do you plan on enacting to support those communities?
Yeah. It became really evident during the coronavirus that the communities living in our state housing facilities were suffering, right down in Kahalu. Because there was an outbreak on Oahu, they mandated that nobody leave their apartment unless they had to go to work in the facilities in Kahalu. And what that meant was that all these kids were constantly in lockdown in their small apartments. They couldn't play outside on the facilities. Their parents were usually at work, which meant the car was gone. And so there was a lot of suffering. I had a number of different people that work within those communities providing, they did tutoring, they brought food, games and whatnot, but just reached out and said, how do we mitigate this? How do we find vans or activities or ways to take these kids to do something else? They're putting on incredible amounts of weight. They're suffering from severe depression. And so for me, and once again, going back to this job, you never know what's going to necessarily come your way, but it was working with those groups and organizations and the people that already had those relationships, calling the state, finding out what could be done, calling, making sure to get a hold of the vans that were driving around with the capacity for Wi-Fi so that could be closer to their facility. So just kind of one example of what happened in the last year and how I tried to at least use this role and my voice to collaborate with the other, just with other humans to help take better care of the people that live here.
Thank you so much.
Follow up on that, is broadband access an issue that can be tackled at the county level or more so at the state level?
Well, right now it looks like we're going to be getting a lot of financial resources for broadband access. I know that for myself, it's been a challenging topic because then all of a sudden you're into 5G and talking about, some of those technologies, which while it may be effective in a city when you're looking at self-driving cars in the future, I don't think the Big Island needs to be fully encompassed in 5G technology right now, but getting broadband access to the communities that are more rural, it's now, it's a privilege, right? But in order to participate in society at a level that could be more efficient and effective, it is important that people have access to digital technologies. So I think it is really imperative, and I think it is coming, and the resources are coming, and the acknowledgement is there that to be kind of requesting or expecting communities that don't have access to participate at the same capacity as those that do is environmental racism, essentially. And so providing that is imperative in order for everyone to succeed.
Thank you. Yeah, and then following up on that, in terms of access to resources or education, we know that Hawaii Public Schools was also a big topic around teachers and general education. So what aspects of our educational system do you believe need the most attention? public education?
Well, I can tell you about the specific ones in my district. I had the opportunity to work closely with the community up in Holualoa and Holualoa School and so grateful for Neil Azevedo and his work with his team with DPW in doing the shave and pave along Holualoa, along the side of the road so that parents could safely park in the parking lot and walk over and pick up their kids. Still trying to navigate, tried to get a open space purchase, trying to get safe routes around that school. The school itself was built hundreds of years ago and was never intended to house this many students, but they continue to do the best that they can. There is a road that runs through their campus. There have been cars that have lost control. Thankfully, nobody's been hurt. So continuing to try and be creative and work with this administration to potentially build a little bridge over the culvert and then use an easement that would remove that roadway from going through the school. It's slow but steady movement on that. Also worked with the principal at Kahakai Elementary recently as school got back into session and buses were really challenged to be had, whether or not it's because bus drivers ended up with COVID or whatnot, parents weren't putting their kids on buses. We ended up with traffic jams on Royal Poinciana and down to Ali'i Drive. And the principal reached out to me. She had a community meeting. The challenge was police didn't have the extra manpower to help. She was adamant that, hey, in a 2-week time frame with some support from law enforcement, we can retrain people to only turn left. And so worked really diligently with her on how to get people to do that and change that flow. And it's become successful. So once again, being there to help support what her needs are, they needed funding to help pay for the off-duty police officers. I said, I'll pull out some contingency funding and allocate that towards it. It was the sheriff's department that was able to help, but it brought to light the opportunity. So often it's like, oh, well, that's state. DOE's got to deal with that. That's state. But no, it's our community. They're our kids. Worked closely with Innovations Public Charter School with their garden program and the canoe, and it's where our kids are, and they're our future. And it's helping in whatever needs to be done. So there are many things I could see with the DOE transitioning. Not particularly in my sphere of direct influence on their administrative capacities. I'd love to see our teachers get raises. My sister-in-law is a teacher at Kalaka'i High School. But in the interim, I was ready to go down there and put on a jacket and, move traffic. Like sometimes it feels good to get out and actually be able to do something instead of always kind of being behind a desk or so thankfully we were able to mitigate those issues.
Great. And Michaela, do you want to ask one last question before we wrap it up for the evening?
Sure. Yeah, my last question has to do with infrastructure. So it's revolving around electric vehicles. So several current electric vehicle charging stations around the island have been found to be inoperative for long periods of time. So how would you work to help develop an adequate network to keep pace with the demand for more chargers and a means to ensure that they stay maintained and safely accessible?
I'm grateful for the hard work of Heather Kimball and some of the people at our state legislature who are passing legislation for that and the requirements for any future developments to incorporate them. I just got an invitation for Hawaii Community College in Hilo for the unveiling of their new electric vehicle ports. So as we transition, I really feel like not only does the responsibility reside with me for follow-up, but that's my call out to my community. Let me know. I don't know. I don't have an electric vehicle yet. I am hopeful at some point. It's been interesting to see the transition in Kona specifically and the number of Teslas. But it's about communication and letting us know what's out, what's not out, because while I just feel like I'm just kind of the servant of all, I recognize that people in this role, a phone call from me to, let's say, and I don't know what's going on with theirs, but Target is the one I think of because I always see their EV chargers. They have quite a few. But a phone call from me saying, hey, I was told that you're da 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 da, they may not know either. But that's helpful when it comes from a council person. It adds another little bit of urgency yeah. So those are the things I would look for, and I will continue to support through voting the legislation that's been brought forth by some of my counterparts on the council, so we can continue to transition. The other part that I am very hopeful for, because it's great to transition to an electric vehicle, but if all the charging stations are run off of fossil fuels, then we're kind of just switched the reliance. So I would love to see us continue to navigate our way out of that and using solar and other forms of sustainable energy production in order to fuel our vehicles.
Awesome.
Thank you. And I love that open invitation for your constituents to reach out to you as well. But that brings us to the end of our interview tonight. And I apologize if there's cookie frogs in the background. Hopefully they're not too loud.
That's me. Yeah, the cookie frogs are probably for me.
But
yeah, which
Big
is something we have in council at different times is the vouchers for citric acid. So you can come and pick them up and then get citric acid to spray.
Interesting. I might follow up on that. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. But big mahalo to you, Council Member Rebecca Villegas. We really appreciate your time, and thank you, Michaela Keuchi, as well for joining us this evening. At HULI PAC, we're building something that we believe the political establishment has never seen before, a slate of Pono candidates. At this time, your donation to our cause to help with this transformation and support of candidates is really meaningful. And so if you're able to hop onto our website after this, it's HULIHI, HULIHI.com, and you should be easily able to make a donation there. But thank you for tuning in, and stay tuned for upcoming interviews next week. Aloha.
Thank you guys. Appreciate you so much.
Thank you.